Thank you for joining me for another episode of Sam's Tech Stuff. Today, we're taking a look at the Phanteks Eclipse G360A case. This PC case looked like it was going to be a really good value and a high quality case at a pretty fair price, so I wanted to pick this one up and test it out. The Eclipse G360A is an airflow focused gaming mid-tower case that features 3 included RGB fans. The G360A has relatively good air and water cooling support, with several fan and radiator mounting locations. Thankfully, whether you choose to go with air cooling or water cooling, the mesh front panel is going to allow a pretty decent amount of air to move through the case. By default, there are 3 included D-RGB PWM fans that offer a software-free RGB experience, but also a wide range of RGB configuration software is supported. The case fans themselves are pretty decent performers too, pushing a maximum of 50 CFM at a static pressure rating of 0.96 mm to H2O at the maximum rotational speed of 1500 RPM. At the max rated speed, the sound output is right around 27 dBA, which really isn't too bad. If the 3 included 120mm fans weren't enough for your setup though, you can add another 4 120mm fans for a total of 7 120mm fans, or up to 4 140mm fans. The top of the case is also perforated with a good quality mesh air filter as well. You can install a larger tower cooler up to 162mm tall, which is going to keep your cooling options wide open. As for water cooling support, the case will allow for either a 280mm or a 360mm rad to be installed at the front as well as the top. You will have to strategically choose though whether or not your 360mm rad goes in the top or the front mounting location. 360mm rads aren't supported in both the front and the top locations simultaneously. Despite that, there's still a pretty good amount of radiator support for at least a few hundred watts of heat dissipation between the CPU and the graphics card. I think the cooling options are well thought out in this case, and this case is definitely going to support higher end, high wattage, and high heat output gaming PCs. The G360A is going to come in at 17.9 inches wide, 7.87 inches deep, and 18.3 inches tall. The case will support up to a 400mm long GPU, which is nice to see, though I will be using my smaller RTX 3060 XC model. The case does optionally support vertical GPU mounting, but this is an add-on that you would have to purchase with the case. In terms of the PSU, depending on where you install your 3.5-inch drive cage, you can either fit up to a 220mm long PSU or a 280mm long PSU. The bottom of the case is ventilated under the PSU area with a removable filter for easy maintenance. Moving on to the storage, the G360A will support a total of 2 2.5-inch SSD mounts, as well as 2 3.5-inch hard drive mounts. This should be plenty for a gaming and streaming PC. There's a pretty decent amount of space inside of the case for building your PC. In terms of the motherboard, you can fit anywhere from an ITX to an ATX board, or even an extended ATX board up to 280mm wide. As for the top I/O panel, it's relatively average. You're getting a combined 3.5mm audio jack, 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, and 2 RGB control buttons, a color button and a mode button for the RGB lighting patterns. I do like the port selection. I like that there's the audio port, the 2 USBs, and actually useful RGB buttons, but I would have absolutely loved to see a USB-C type connection on the I/O panel. This is probably one of those features though that they needed to cut in order to hit the target price. At the current pricing, I think this is a pretty fair trade-off because the rest of the case is really well designed and highly functional. As for the cooling performance, I found the G360A to be quite good. I was a little suspect of the stock fan placement, putting all 3 fans up at the front versus 2 fans at the front and 1 exhaust. However, after running 8 hours of Asus Realbench stress test in a few different configurations on my 12600K and RTX 3060 simultaneously, I saw that the temps were relatively good. For reference, the cooler I'm using is the ultra-budget Peerless Assassin P120, which is a dual tower heatsink. The tests were run with an ambient temperature around 70 degrees Fahrenheit or about 20 to 21 Celsius. For the stock run, the P cores on the 12600K averaged 50 degrees Celsius, while the E cores averaged 46 degrees Celsius. The 3060XC average core temp was roughly 63.8 to 64.5 degrees Celsius. After the stock run finished, I reran the 8-hour-long real bench stress test with the 12600K and the RTX 3060, both overclocked but with the stock fan profiles, to kind of simulate what an average user might run into. The 12600K was running at 5 GHz on the P cores and 4 GHz on the E cores with a static voltage of 1.3 volts set in the BIOS. The RTX 3060XC was at plus 100% core voltage and 111% power limit, which I believe on this GPU is roughly 190 watts. In terms of the temperature results, the P cores averaged about 67 C and the E cores averaged about 57 C after the 8-hour run. The RTX 3060 core temp averaged about 66 C this time around. I think that the focus of airflow from the front of the case really helped keep the CPU and GPU core temps down without doing too much extra work. For a case with this kind of performance and features in the price range, I think this is a really good buy. Another aspect of the case that I like was the glass side panel. I haven't seen a glass side panel designed this way before, where the steel part seems like it's almost stamped or somehow glued at the front and the back of the tempered glass panel. Aesthetically speaking, I also really enjoyed the fact that Phanteks threw in the PSU shroud RGB strip. It's a nice subtle touch that I would expect on a case that honestly costs a lot more than this one. Nice to see included on the G360. In terms of the cable routing and actually building inside of the case, I didn't really have any issues or run into anything strange or anything that slowed down the build process. I purchased this case, it was not a review sample. It was nice to see that a general sample didn't have any defects and everything went pretty smooth. So if you're looking for an RGB case with good airflow that's actually in stock and actually has a good price, well, here it is, the Phanteks G360A. I would definitely recommend this case for a mid-range and even a high-end gaming PC build. If you like this one, hit that thumbs up button, then sub to the channel to let me know that you want more reviews. If you want notifications when new videos land on the channel, hit that bell icon too.